Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's dive into a story from the past. Imagine the mid-90s when the internet was just taking off and email was still a novelty in the military. Picture a young soldier and his buddies, fresh off duty, making a beer run to the Class 6 store on post. It's a tale that shows sometimes a little creative thinking can outsmart even the strictest of regulations. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. A six-pack by any other name. I was in the Army way back when the internet was new and computer-illiterate commanding officers had their clerks print out emails so they could read them. As a young private, after work, me and my buddies would often stop by the Class 6 store on post, an Army liquor store, to buy beer after we got off duty. One day, me and my buddy grabbed a 12-pack of beers on the way to the barracks. When we got to the barracks, we had to pass the CQ, charge of quarters, basically a guard posted at the entrance to the barracks. The CQ that day was a specialist, E4, who I really didn't get along with. He was mad he had to pull CQ duty, and he was always trying to find everyone's stupid infractions. He'd taken a special interest in me for some reason. The CQ told us we could only bring 6 beers into the barracks since he was an E4 and outranked myself, E2, and my friend, E3. I was very respectful when I asked him what he meant. He pulled out a 3-ring binder with the barracks SOP, standard operating procedure, and pointed to the section that said a soldier could only bring 6 beers into the barracks. Interesting. I thought about handing my friend 6 beers and taking 6 myself to get around this stupid rule, but this guy would log that we opened the 12-pack of beer outdoors in the logbook and we'd get in trouble anyway. But then I had an interesting idea. I thanked the CQ and told my friend to come on. We walked back to the Class 6 and got a refund on the beer. Then we bought 6 40-ounce bottles of malt liquor. We went from 144 fluid ounces of beer with 12 12-ounce cans to 240 fluid ounces of malt liquor in 6 40-ounce bottles. When we returned to the barracks, the CQ wanted to inspect our package. He just about hit the ceiling when he saw I was carrying 6 40-ounce bottles. CQ: I told you could only bring 6 beers into the barracks. Me: there are 6 beers in here. I can count them off if you'd like. I then proceeded to count them before he could respond. Flustered, he allowed us to proceed. The next morning, the first sergeant, highest-ranking non-commissioned officer in the company, called me to his office. He yelled at me for about 5 full minutes before he calmed down long enough to tell me I was getting an Article 15 non-judicial punishment, roughly the equivalent of a plea bargain. Why? Because I violated his SOP by bringing 6 40-ounce beers into the barracks. That was when I heard the CO, commanding officer, a captain in the next office over, call for the first sergeant. First sergeant jumped up and went to the CO's office. I strained to hear them talking for a few minutes. From what I could make out, they were reviewing the SOP and comparing to the CQ log, but their voices got louder as they started expressing different views, and I could hear that part clearly. First sergeant: but it clearly says you can have a 6-pack of beers. CO: First sergeant, it says you can have 6 beers. First sergeant: but it's obvious it means 6 cans of beer. CO: No, first sergeant, it's not obvious. Send that soldier back to work. We're done here. Couple of seconds later, I could feel the sheer anger as first sergeant stormed back into his office and bellowed, "Get the F out of here." So I did. I absolutely adore malicious compliance in the military. For something that relies heavily on stringent rules and regulations, it's awesome when you play the same game but come out on top against their assumptions. Well played. And our second story. My entitled neighbor wanted to join us for dinner. My husband wasn't home and it was just me with my 2 children and my cousin who was visiting. It was raining out and my neighbor rang the doorbell. Let's call her Elaine. She said she was locked out of her house and needed to wait for her husband. I don't know this neighbor very well. We recently purchased our home. I said she was free to wait in the entryway of our home. It has a bench and she could play with her phone. She asked if she could join us for dinner, and I said, I don't know her very well, and my husband isn't home. She said she doesn't mind. I said, but I mind because it's a safety issue. She said she feels safe and I shouldn't worry. I said, I don't feel safe. She got quiet for 30 seconds and said she's an occupational therapist and a healthcare professional, so we should feel fine. I said no. She can wait in the hall or leave. I'll bring her a bowl of food. She was on the phone for 3 hours and yelling, saying how we were horrible people for not letting her in. She poured the bowl of soup I gave her into my kid's shoes in the shoe rack opposite the bench she was sitting on in the hallway. I can't believe she thought she was entitled to come inside a stranger's home. Edit. The hallway in my home is 12 feet long and has 2 closets, a long shoebox, and a bench. The hallway entryway is the entrance to my home. There's a door leading into the house at the end of the hall, and it locks. This door opens into a greater hall that separates the kitchen and the living room. The door leading into the actual home part of the house is always locked, and I locked it and didn't let her in there. She wanted to go inside and eat in the kitchen with my kids and cousin. I don't know her very well. I did give her food, and I allowed her to come inside the hallway/entryway because it was raining. We were in the kitchen, and we heard her on the phone for hours and didn't know what to do. We recently moved into this neighborhood. We waited for her to leave, and when we went into the hall, we saw the mess she made by pouring the soup into the kids' shoes. The shoes were washed immediately, and the shoebox was wiped down. If I'd known her better, or if my husband was home, I would have invited her inside. She poured the soup you gave her into your kids' shoes? I think you made the right choice by not letting her in. She sounds like a complete sociopath. And our next story. Go home and don't come back till your hair is dried. Fine by me. I'm a dyspraxic. For those unsure what that is, I have no sense of time and my mind works faster than my body, so I can trip and bump into things and get called clumsy and lazy by people who don't understand it. My employer was aware as I notify everyone and put it on application forms. During my time working in the local hospital as an admin assistant in radiology, I did fairly well, attending work on time, but to ensure this happened, I sometimes had to miss out steps of my morning routine. Usually things like brushing hair and having to do a messy bun so it looks tidy but can be done in 2 seconds, etc. On this particular day, I had a shower, and once I was out of the shower, I realized I only had time to dress and get to work, so I must have been on a slow day. I dress as fast as I can and rub my hair as dry as I can and brush it so it's neat and damp and rush to work. Luckily, I lived by the back entrance, so I only had to walk 15 minutes, if that, across the site, and I made it on time. Once at work, I got logged on and started working when my manager came over and said I should go home and dry my hair. This annoyed me since I was dripping wet, it was damp, but almost dry, so I confirmed that they were sending me home to ensure my pay, as if I agreed to leave, they didn't have to pay me, but if they told me to leave, they had to pay me. They confirmed that I had to leave and that they were telling me to because I refused to leave willingly for damp hair. I walked home and realized they have no idea if I have a hairdryer or not, and since I'm being paid for the time it takes me to dry my hair, I'll sit watching TV until it's dry. I must have sat there 2 to 3 hours and went back in time for my dinner break, then in the afternoon got back to working. The manager came over to ask what took so long, and I responded, my hairdryer broke, and as you didn't want me in till my hair was dry, I waited for it to dry naturally. They never complained about it again after that. I ended up working there for 4 years in total. It was one of the best people they employed. The manager asked if there was anything she could do to keep me, but since I was having trouble with my personal life at the time, there wasn't anything she could do. So she got a collection going for my last day and ended up with that much money. They had a hamper made with personalized gifts and had so much left over I ended up with a 50-pound Amazon gift card too. I offered to do bank shifts where I could to help out and did that for a year before I had to stop that too, but she even now still says she wished she had more people like me, we're connected on social media, on her team, and when jobs came up, she offered me them until she retired 2 years ago. So what happens if it rains on your way in? What a ridiculous thing to go on a power trip about. And our next story. Wants me to work overtime but won't pay for it. I'm in the midst of leaving a truly terrible job. I've only been there for a year, but began noticing issues after the first month. Now, this isn't healthcare, and we work with very vulnerable people. And I've seen some horrendous ethical issues and lack of competency among employees and my employer, e.g. permitting clinicians to perform tasks they're not trained in, recommending treatments that are basically pseudoscience. Not to mention my employer has no respect for boundaries or work-life balance, which are essential in this field if you want to avoid burnout, and has horrible work-life balance, time management, and organizational skills themselves, leading them to be behind on all work constantly with over 2,000 emails sitting in their inbox. This also resulted in much of my work being delayed and clients getting upset that they're waiting for things that the employer needs to do. Because of this incompetence, I get constant emails and texts asking me to work on off days, or my employer texting at 8 p.m. or 7 a.m. and expecting a reply. I've set very clear boundaries from the start, and I don't work outside my hours, and have also raised concerns about the ethics/competency issues, which resulted in my employer becoming defensive and emotional and changing nothing. Since giving my notice, the employer's been pushing boundaries even more. So being the compliant human that I am, and because I do need to wrap things up that I've been waiting for my employer to get to for months, I began responding and including every single work-related communication outside of my hours or request for a small task that I need to complete on an off day as hours worked, and it banked up some nice overtime. Last week, the employer sent an email saying that I'm no longer allowed to work overtime and every hour worked OT will be banked as vacation time instead. I don't want that, because if I'm working OT, I deserve to be paid for it. So I immediately stopped responding to anything after hours or on off days and have been working only 8 hours on my scheduled days. The frustration and passive aggression coming from my employer since I did that is unmatched. Truly, they should get an award for the snarky and condescending emails and texts they've sent me. I only have a few days left and will be filing an ethics complaint for the many egregious things I've seen once I'm out of there. It's what they deserve. And I can't wait. Boss, you're asking me to work overtime for free. That's not just immoral or unethical, it's illegal. I'm not doing it. If you want me to work on off hours, you pay me overtime. And our last story. Cops destroyed my car. I'd purchased a used Cadillac a few months ago for a good price from a mechanic I knew. He said his son was driving it. When I first purchased, I noticed a small container with a weird scent. I threw it away and searched the car thoroughly to make sure there was nothing else in the vehicle. Flash forward to the other night, and I was pulled over for an improper lane change. Officer was nice enough, but said he thought he saw me making suspicious movements when I was being pulled over. He asked to search the vehicle, and at which point I said no. Waited half an hour for the dog to show up. He alerted to my side driver, said at which point they probably caused, and they searched the vehicle. He checked all the normal spaces like the glove compartment, center console, side panels, trunk, and they found nothing. After this point, they started to separate the bit of material under the steering wheel and continued to thrash the entire vehicle. They cut into the leather seats. They also cut into my spare tire. Mind you, I have no criminal background and actually am in the process of working in law enforcement. They cut open just about everything in the car and searched everywhere and found nothing. I'm obviously growing increasingly agitated at this point, but the officer standing with me on the curb was anticipating this, ordered me to remain quiet and wait patiently. After this well over 2-hour ordeal, I was told I was free to go. When asking the officer if they were offering any restitutions for the damages they caused, he simply told me to call the county. The seats obviously had a razor blade go through them, and there's so many things dangling they made the car look closer to what I probably would have paid for it. Not to mention they also ruined my spare. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.